an update on the status of Jay Bruce. This seems very like Yoenis Cespedes last year. We're talking about him every week. Jim, let's start with you. Any movement on the Jay Bruce front?
Right now, there has been no movement. I think really, but there's about 7 or 8 teams looking for outfield help, but there are about 4 or 5 teams, from what I'm told, that the Mets are talking to about Bruce or Granderson. Granderson, maybe more, or Granderson. And I still don't think they want to move Granderson, but definitely Bruce, when it comes to those teams, that what they're doing is circling back on any of those teams that have expressed interest or have expressed interest in similar type guys on the free agent market and trying to see if there's a match there. The asking price seems like it's going down by the day, and I think that's the thing that's a little bit surprising, because this guy had a heck of a season, even though it wasn't great, we know, for the Mets. So that part of it, remains to be seen if they're going to have to take back salary or not.
Yeah, I think that's the key point right there, Jim. And the Mets need to trade Jay Bruce. They need to get rid of that salary to do the other things they want to do this offseason. Key in the bullpen, signing a couple of guys. But as we get deeper into January, do the Mets come down on their price? Do they say, maybe we're looking at a little bit more of a salary dump here as opposed to getting something really good in return, whether that's a reliever, whether that's a really nice prospect package, or even just one really good prospect. I think as you get later into January, you're going to see that price drop, and the Mets obviously don't want it to drop too far, but this is the question that they're weighing currently.
You guys have both kind of touched on it a little bit already, but Jim, as you see it, what is the biggest holdup, maybe 1 or 2 biggest holdups to the trade for or of Jay Bruce?
So I think there's 2 things. First off, it's an external. It's a marketplace. It's all crowded. It's not just outfield. Like we've mentioned the outfielders before, Pagan and Michael Saunders and Colby Rasmus and that whole group, Mark Trumbo. Teams aren't necessarily locked into needing outfielders. They could use a first baseman and take a current first baseman they have and move him to the outfielder. They're looking for flexibility. So that offensive bat in general is really gumming up the process. And then internally, from the Mets perspective, you have to go back and think about it. A couple years ago, they got out in front of themselves with Ike Davis. They were above the budget, right? They signed Granderson, signed Cologne. They had Ike still. They had Duda, and they ended up moving Ike into the season. But they cleared up that payroll, and they got out in front of themselves, so to speak. The year later, then it was Dylan G's turn, and they didn't move him. They had to release him and eat that money, and they were over their budget. Everyone has a budget, and so to be over that, it's kind of an uncomfortable spot from a front office. But if you've done it before and you can shed that salary, then that frees up what you need to do after that. The problem is the Mets, because of what happened with G, and I think that internal work that you have, it's making it hard for them to do that again. Ask ownership to go above and beyond with their budget in the hopes that they can move them in case they can't, which right now, it hasn't been looking good.
Now, guys, the famous saying is beggars can't be choosers, and the Mets certainly are not at the point where they're beggars, but we know that they do want to get rid of Jay Bruce, and everybody else knows that they want to get rid of Jay Bruce. We saw a report recently from Ken Rosenthal saying, hey, maybe the Phillies are a match. That is not something that would be ideal by any stretch to trade within your own division. But are you getting the sense, Anthony, that now, as we get later in the game, a trade with the Phillies is something the Mets are at least open to?
I think the Mets would be open to trading Jay Bruce to the Miami Dolphins if it came to that at this point. I mean, really, they are just looking for the best possible match here, the best possible thing they can get in return. And whether that's a reliever that they could put in the middle or the back end of their bullpen, whether that's a really nice prospect, those are the 2 things that they want. But if you're in the Mets situation now and you have all that inventory that Jim was talking about with the outfielders who are out there, and all of a sudden the Phillies come up with a good offer and you say, well, it's in the division. No, they can't be thinking like that. They will trade him to pretty much any team at this point just to get rid of him for something good in return.
Now, here's the one thing, though. With the Phillies, you're probably not going to get something too good in return for Jay Bruce. This is a team that's rebuilding, so they're not going to give up a whole heck of a lot for him. If the Mets were to go down that road with the Phillies, does that feel like something that would represent just a straight salary dump from the Mets' perspective?
Probably. I think it leans a little more that way, which is probably why you're not going to see him trade to the Phillies. I think there's enough other teams out there who do need outfield help. The Orioles are one that really spring to mind to me, a team that is looking at free agents, but certainly needs some help out there and is going to make a move by the end of the offseason. So I think ultimately the Mets do not go down that path with the Phillies for that exact reason. But, hey, if push comes to shove at the end of January and Jay Bruce is still a Met, it's an option.
Now, the projections for Jay Bruce this year, I know you're very into the steamer projections, which take into account what the last three seasons project out a little bit. They're not too kind for Jay Bruce this upcoming season. When you look at numbers like that Fangraphs projects out, and we're taking a look at them right now. Does the front office look at something like this, both the Mets front office and maybe a potential team that is looking to acquire Jay Bruce?
Well, I think they do, yeah. And really, when you look at it, the Mets have their own internal metrics and statistical department, and maybe there is a little tweak here and there, but it does factor in. Steamers factors in the ballpark, what you expect there from the ballpark. And, obviously, like you said, that's not real kind, those numbers, when you look at it on the average over the last 3 years. Other teams look at it too, but they also look at it, if you were to look at it realistically, you go back and see, all right, what were the projections last year going into the year in Cincinnati in that kind of ballpark? And if you're a team like the Phillies who have a similar ballpark, you go, okay, well, the value is certainly going down on Bruce, but we think in our park there's some hidden value there. And so you're kind of working that as part of your conversation with the Mets. We're not going to give up anything, but we'll take him off your hands, even though you're feeling like, boy, I think he could be a 30 home run guy in Citizens Bank.